the Muslim Community Center with many friends and neighbors. Good to be here with Dr. Flowers. And let me just start by thanking all of you here at the Muslim Community Center for what you do, not only for the Muslim community in our region, but for our entire community. With the clinic, I remember very well when it was opened and worked with you in some of those efforts. So thank you for all the progress that we've made, and again, embracing everybody in our community. As many of you know, my father was in the Foreign Service, and I grew up many of my early years overseas, born in Karachi, Pakistan, lived in India and Sri Lanka and Turkey, and I believe those experiences, growing up with different cultures, different religions, people of all different backgrounds, gives someone a great appreciation, and gave me a great appreciation for the strengths of people from all different backgrounds. And one of the things that's so fortunate about our community here in Montgomery County and Maryland and the United States of America is so much of the world has come here. And that diversity has strengthened us. And if you look at the Muslim community in the United States, you've seen a community that has provided great advances and great contributions to our country in every field of endeavor. And so I look forward to continue to work with you to strengthen our community and continue to work together. We're at a very dangerous time in American politics. You have the front runner in the Republican Party, Donald Trump, trying to raise himself up politically by dividing Americans one against another, dividing people on ethnicity, dividing people on race, and definitely trying to divide people based on religion. And all the name-calling and hateful rhetoric about Muslims is something that we all need to call out, we need to stand up to, because it violates everything we stand for as a country. The idea that people of all faiths come here to the United States to make a living, the idea that we will continue to come together as a more perfect union. So we've got to continue to stand up together to that very, very hateful rhetoric going forward. It's also counterproductive from purely a national security perspective, because we know all our friends and neighbors in the Muslim world want to join us in this fight against extremism and the kind of ideology. And by alienating the Muslim community around the world, we only make it more difficult on ourselves. And so people like Donald Trump, in addition to being bigots, are actually harming and putting at risk the security of the United States. I was very proud to stand with our community, with this community, in the aftermath of 9/11, when we worked hard to educate Americans and Marylanders that Al-Qaeda was a group that had hijacked a great religion, Islam, for their own extremist purposes. The same being true of ISIL now. And so we need to continue to work together to make sure we stand up to that. And not only stand up, but also put forward strong statements on our own and officially. I'm very proud to have joined Congressman Donna from Virginia in the resolution condemning bigotry and violence against and hateful statements about our Muslim community. And we need to always stand up and to work with Attorney General Lynch and law enforcement to prevent religious profiling, because everybody, as Dr. King said, needs to be judged on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin, not on their religion, not on other things. And we need to continue to build that kind of community. And I will end with this, that as I mentioned, I grew up many of my early years overseas and was very proud to be part of a family representing the United States. That also causes you to hold up a mirror and constantly ask your question whether the United States is as good back home as we hold ourselves to be overseas. And while I'm very proud of everything the United States stands for, we also know that this country has yet to meet all its promises. The promise of equal rights and equal justice and equal opportunity. We've come a long way. and it's been a struggle. But we all know we have a long way to go to make sure we build that ever more perfect union where we end that discrimination against people based on religion or race or ethnicity. That is our continued charge. I ask you to continue to give me the opportunity to be your partner in that effort, not just here in the 8th Congressional District, but throughout the state of Maryland, representing you in the United States Senate. I'm proud to have stood with you, and I'm asking for your help as I run for the United States Senate. Thank you all very much for what you do.
Last year, and again, if you have questions, go ahead and take them and give them to Asma, who's gonna collect up here, and then Asma, go ahead and take them back to the table over there. We'll collect those as well. So last year, as you know, Benjamin Netanyahu came in at the time when the Iran nuclear deal was being worked out, and there was a little consternation from the administration about how he came and spoke directly to Congress. Some congressmen boycotted. I know you attended. Tell us a little bit about what was happening in that realm. Why did Netanyahu have to reach out directly to Congress in that case, as opposed to going to the administration? And what was your feeling about that? You chose to be in the actual speech that he gave. What is your general position on what Netanyahu asked for?
Well, sure. Well, I was very clear at the time that it was wrong for Prime Minister Netanyahu to come and insert himself in the middle of a decision being made by the United States Congress. I said at the time I did not think that was appropriate. I also believe that I would be in a much stronger position to come out in favor, as I did, of the Iran agreement, and if I could say that I had listened to all sides. If you're not present and not willing to listen to somebody, I think it's harder to say, well, I considered all the different opinions, and I came to this conclusion after hearing opposing voices. And so I felt on a much stronger ground coming out, as I did strongly to support the President's agreement, the Iran nuclear agreement, being able to say, listen, I heard the people who were for it, and I heard the people who were against it. And I concluded that this was the best way to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And the statement that I put out in support of that agreement is one that the White House then pushed out to others around the country. Some of the groups that were very involved in putting that agreement together described my statement as one of the tipping points in the debate because I think I put forward a pretty strong argument. And I do think my background, having grown up overseas and a strong and abiding interest in foreign policy and national security, put me in a position to be persuasive with many of my colleagues and be able to not just be one vote and one voice, but somebody who could help carry that message of the importance of that agreement to others. And I do believe that agreement was the best way to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
So one of the things we're doing with the Muslim community is helping them get a better understanding of how to engage more in the political process. In that, if you were to look back a few months ago and say, hey, if I had this level of support from communities A, B, or C, including the Muslim community, what could this community do to help you help Muslims more?
Well, I think this community is in a position to help the Muslim community more, and actually all communities more, on so many of the issues that I think are important to all of us. I'm the senior Democrat on the Budget Committee, which means that I'm number one leading the fight against the Ryan Republican budget, which would dramatically disinvest in important areas for our country, disinvest in our kids' education, disinvest in a lot of the healthcare services. So in addition to fighting that back, I've also put forward an alternative vision that I think is based on the values and priorities of most people in our community, which is making sure we invest in our kids' education, making sure that everybody has a chance to reach his or her full potential going forward. We could also continue to support in our effort to fight discrimination wherever it raises its head. The community here has been very engaged with us in trying to reach out to law enforcement, both locally, state, and federal, at the federal level, but we need to continue to press that case to make it clear that based on religion, and that we need to work together to achieve our common goal of trying to prevent violence against anybody in any community, and those who would choose to do us harm, and that we need to work together to accomplish that goal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you made about discrimination. So one of the questions from the audience is that we're feeling a little bit more discrimination from banks and financial institutions. So it's one thing to say we should fight the discrimination. What could you be able to do while you're in the Senate to help fight the discrimination, specifically against bank loans, financial institutions not providing enough help to potentially Muslim businesses?
Well, sure, and this is an issue that we constantly have to fight in different forms. Many of the minority communities have faced this kind of discrimination in lending, and that's why, as part of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill, we empowered this new entity, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, to be out there protecting consumers. And I have, with some of my colleagues, urged them recently to make sure that they collect the data on any kind of discriminatory lending practices, so that we can then take the enforcement actions where necessary. So that's at the broad policy level. In addition to that, I would just urge anybody who has a particular example or case where they believe they've been discriminated against to let our office know. We were very involved during the home foreclosure crisis, trying to help constituents on a one-to-one basis when the banks were coming after them, and we were successful in many instances in helping people keep their homes. So if somebody feels they've been discriminated against based in lending, there are clearly legal actions that can be taken, and again, we want to be a partner, because it undermines the whole idea, the premise of America, which is that all of us should be out there to put our entrepreneurial talents to work, and that people should be able to get a loan and start a small business or whatever that may be. And so look forward to working with you.
Yeah, so in that case, the recommendation is at least reach out to the office or go to cfpb.gov, which has the ability to help out on the consumer protection side. A couple of questions also came in from the audience. What is your position on fracking and fossil fuels, which area, and against or for drone strikes? So obviously a huge amount of increase in the last 8 years, even more so than the previous administration. General feelings on those two topics?
All right, well, first of all, with respect to energy policy, fracking, I've long believed that we need to move our energy production toward cleaner energy for a variety of reasons: national security reasons, climate change reasons. In fact, I've introduced one of the leading proposals in the United States Congress with respect to climate change. It's a proposal that's been endorsed by the Sierra Club, and I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club in this Senate race, because I think it's really important that we recognize that climate change right now is already costing all of us. Our home insurance rates, our property casualty rates are going up. It's already hitting people in the pocketbook. And so in addition to hitting people in the pocketbook, of course it's doing great damage around the planet. And you only have to go to places like Annapolis, Maryland, where the storm surges are much more severe. So we need to move in that direction. With respect to fracking, there's a set of legislation called the FRAC PAC in Congress, which is a set of legislation to provide important regulation over fracking that takes place around the country. You saw probably some of those videos from Pennsylvania where you turn on the water and it turns on fire. And I also support the moratorium here in the state of Maryland. So that's where, with respect to, and I should say, in addition to renewable energy, we need to move forward on more energy efficiency. And from my days in the Maryland legislature, where I introduced legislation called the Green Buildings Incentives Act, to other legislation in the legislature, we've been trying to move in that direction. With respect to drone strikes, I share, I'm sure, the concerns of so many in this room with respect to the increase in the number of drone strikes and the number of innocent people who are killed from those drone strikes, and the importance of making sure that there's much more accountability in the system. And obviously this remains an issue between the United States and some of our partners, including Pakistan and others. So I share the concerns of people in the room with respect to the increased use of drone strikes.
So what do you think about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and trade agreements? Are they helpful to folks here in our community long-term? What are your thoughts on how helpful or maybe unhelpful they might be as far as TPP is concerned?
Sure. Well, I oppose the TPP and been very clear on that. I opposed fast track as well. With respect to trade agreements generally, I think that people should look at them, each one, like you would any agreement reached between two parties, and in the case of trade agreements, ask ourselves the question, is this good for the American economy? Specifically, is it good for American workers and American wages? What impact does it have on our environment? Does it allow other countries to undermine our consumer protection laws, our labor laws, our environmental laws? And in looking at the TPP, I determined that it was not good for American workers, it was not good for American wages, and it did open the door to undermining some of those important consumer and environmental protections here at home. But you got to, you look at each agreement on its own basis. The United States obviously is an economy that over time has relied greatly on exports. We want exports, and we want exports because they help produce American jobs here at home. But when we're entering into trade agreements, we just want to make sure that our exports are dealt with fairly in commerce overseas.
Got it. Okay. So can you talk a little bit about, so if you're aware of the genocide that's going on in Burma, so this gets a little bit less attention than in some other areas because Middle East has a lot of attention here. What could, so as a congressman today, there's not a whole lot you can do directly to impact foreign policy, but as a senator, you might have a bit more power. What does that more power look like, and what could we do to help out this kind of genocide in Burma and other countries as well? Just Burma is an example because it's happening, yeah, and it's not visible enough, so it doesn't get as much attention.
Well, that's right, and one of the reasons I'm running for the Senate is because the Senate does have a greater role in the formation of U.S. Foreign policy and national security policy. And I should say at the outset that my view, and having grown up overseas and been part of a diplomatic family, I've always believed that the United States should use all its tools with respect to foreign policy, diplomacy and development. Use of force should always be the last resort, not the first resort. And I was strongly opposed to the Iraq War. And by the way, just this week, of course, we reached the 13-year anniversary of what I think was a very bad decision. So that's one of the reasons I am running for the United States Senate. What's happening in Burma with respect to the mass killings and genocide is something that we need to use whatever leverage we can to put an end to it. And as you know, we've had more opening relations with Burma, and if we're going to continue that relationship, it's important that we do so in a way that calls out flagrant human rights abuses. And so, my view is we need to be very strong on that, and any time we see that kind of genocide, because the same was true in Darfur, and the same was true when Saddam Hussein, at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, turned its forces on the Kurdish, on the Kurds in Iraq, and you saw the gassing of places like Halabja, and then efforts to simply raise Kurdish villages. So that's an area where, at the time, I was speaking up clearly against. I traveled to the Turkish-Iraq border at the time with another member of the Foreign Relations Committee staff. We did a report about genocide in Kurdistan. So those are the kind of things that it's really important that American voices, and certainly voices of members of the Senate, are focused on and respond strongly to.
So why do you think there was a reluctance with Secretary Kerry calling violence as genocide, but then just recently, this week, the administration did call it out as genocide? Why the issue as far as, yeah?
Look, I don't know where, I don't know Secretary Kerry's decision-making process, but it's pretty clear to me that whatever they're engaged in is exactly what you just said. So my view from the beginning with respect to what's happening with ISIL is that, as I said in my earlier remarks, that they've tried to hijack the name of a great religion for their own purposes and their own horrific purposes, and I have supported the President's policy with respect to pushing back ISIL, helping the Iraqi forces, helping the Kurdish forces, and using U.S. military support. Although I am opposed to putting U.S. forces on the ground, I think Iraq taught us that is something that is not in our interest and actually creates potentially all sorts of other problems, including the decision to go into Iraq helping form the seeds of ISIS at the time. After all, al-Baghdadi was an Iraqi Sunni who became totally, totally radicalized, and we've seen the consequences. So we need to be very smart in how we conduct our foreign policy, and we need to also stand up for our values and human rights as we're talking about here.
No, that's great. And just as a last question, and I know you've been giving us a lot of time, so talk to us, and it was great the way you were putting the fact that if radicalization happens for a variety of reasons, one of them is alienation of youth. So tell us a little bit about, based on the fact that you grew up outside, you know how some folks grow up in other countries, whether they're immigrants here or they're growing up natively here, they're being more and more increasingly alienated, so the youth are. What could you advise based on whether it's your just the ability for you to know what you've done because you grew up on the outside? Tell the youth here, if they feel alienated, what should they be doing? Should they be spending more time at mosques? Should they be spending more time in youth or other programs at their schools? What would you recommend to make them feel a little bit more integrated than they might be if they're being discriminated against right now?
Sure, and of course there are two parts to that, right? I mean, and one part is making sure that the rest of the community is respectful of different religions. And so one of the main things, just to start with, that I think is incumbent upon an elected representative is to do what we did here in our community after 9/11 and what we've worked to do since, ISIS has been engaged in these horrific atrocities, is to educate people in our community to reduce any kind of harassment, any kind of hateful rhetoric. That's why we want to make a strong statement, some of us as members of Congress, in doing that. So number one, we need to make sure that the kind of actions that can create that kind of alienation don't take place in the first place. Second, and that means working with schools, working with local law enforcement, working in all places in the community to educate people. Look, I would just say to all the youth that this country is based on the idea that we can live out all our dreams based on our character and our potential, and that everybody is welcome in the United States regardless of your religion, regardless of your race. That is the promise of America, and we need to constantly work together to refresh that promise, to make it real. And at times like now are the times we've got to refresh even more, because you have people like Donald Trump trying to exploit people's fears, trying to divide people one against another. And that's why, as I've been, talking about issues around the state from the beginning, I often start with a comment about how Donald Trump's hateful rhetoric is designed to divide us, and we need to work extra hard to make sure that we come together. And so my message to students is to say, every one of you is a critical part of this great country of ours, and we need to continue to work together. People of all faiths need to respect everyone else's faith and their own traditions, but also recognize at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and we got to work together, and everybody should have the opportunity to reach their full potential. That is our That is the promise of America, and our struggle is to make sure we meet that promise. You know, Martin Luther King said, Dr. King said, that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, and I believe that. I also believe, as he did, that it's our responsibility as citizens and, you know, people to help bend that arc a little faster and a little further every day. And all of us has a responsibility to be part of that change. And I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to continue to be partners with you in that change.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
To participate in this candidate forum. I think that particularly in this moment in history in the United States, it's really important that we have open debates and that all voices are heard. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be here today. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, since I'm probably new to most of you. I am a mother of 3 children, and I'm a pediatrician. I grew up in Northern Virginia, the youngest of 5 children. I grew up in a single mother household, and I'm the first of 3 daughters to graduate from high school and to graduate from college. I worked my way through high school and college, and I'm the first physician in my family. I did my medical school here in Baltimore at the University of Maryland, and then I did my pediatric residency training at Johns Hopkins, and I practiced for over 15 years. As I was practicing, I saw kind of, well, first, that our healthcare system in this country is not about health, that it really undermines our ability as physicians to provide good quality care to our patients, as we constantly argue with private insurance companies about what our patients need. But also that in many directions, our country, you know, was not going on the right path, that we're not creating the kind of future that our children, all children, deserve to have. And so I left practice in 2007 to do advocacy work full-time on a volunteer basis. I started out at the state level and then the national level, working for a national improved Medicare for all health system. This would be a health system where it's paid for upfront through our taxes, and it's universal, so that every person living in this country, regardless of your documentation status, every person living here would have access to the same high quality, comprehensive standard of care. But that work pretty quickly led me to broaden out into a broad range of issues, and so I worked on a wide range of social, economic, environmental, and racial justice causes since then. And with a strong human rights perspective, I'm on the Leadership Council of the Maryland Healthcare is a Human Right campaign. Through those campaigns that I've organized and participated in, I've seen that when people are organized together and use their power strategically, that we actually can actually set the agenda, put things onto the agenda that were not there previously, and that we can even win necessary change. And so that's where my focus has been for the last 10 years, was how to answer this question of how do we build political power for progressive change in this country. And we've had some very successful campaigns. The reason that I'm bringing this into the Senate now is that I feel it's really critical that I bring this knowledge and experience that I've had over these years into the work inside of the Senate. Because what we see is 2 major political parties that are funded by the wealthy elites. We see that those are the same ones that determine what is acceptable public discourse, what are acceptable solutions that we can talk about, and we see that there are solutions to the crises that we faced. Every single one, there is a solution, and in many cases these solutions are supported by majorities of people in this country, but they're not only not talked about, Congress in many ways is going in the opposite direction from where we should be going. And during the healthcare fight in 2009-2010, as we fought for a single-payer healthcare system, and we had very little resources to do this, we were actually able to get a single-payer legislation introduced on the floor of the Senate for the first time in the history of the United States. It happened in December of 2009. Of course, you didn't hear about it because the media doesn't want to cover these things. But it was an independent senator. It was Senator Sanders who introduced that legislation on the floor of the Senate. It showed the power of a popular movement and an independent candidate were able to bring that to the floor of the Senate. So there are a number of things that I'm running on in terms of my platform. I believe that we can end poverty. I'd like to see us move off of a model of taking our public dollars and investing them in research and infrastructure that is then handed over to the private sector to profit off of, and instead see those as public investments that should have a public return, which over time we can start to build what's called a guaranteed basic income, so that every person in the United States has at least a basic amount of money to provide for housing and clothing and food and those types of things. This is not a radical idea. Actually, it's a long history of this idea being in existence. In the 1970s, it was on the platform of both Nixon and McGovern. And so we need to bring that idea back around. There are countries that are starting to experiment with that. But we can end poverty immediately. We can solve our healthcare crisis with an improved Medicare for all healthcare system. 80% of Democratic voters want it. A plurality of Americans would like to see this type of a system, but we need champions inside of Congress who are willing to fight for it, and people on the outside that are willing to push for it. We can have a transition to a clean, green energy economy, and it's imperative that we do that, because just last month in February we saw the highest rise in temperature, and scientists are now saying that we're entering a new phase in the climate crisis. And so I've been involved around Maryland and DC and nationally fighting to end the carbon and nuclear energy and move towards renewables. And we can rein in Wall Street abuses right now. You know, you were talking about the banking discrimination with Chris. We could take existing law right now and hold the Wall Street executives that were responsible for the 2008 crisis, we hold them accountable. When we had the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s, there were 30,000 investigations and 1,000 felony convictions. Since the 2008 crisis, there have been 0. But I work with a group called the Bank Whistleblowers United. These are white-collar crime specialists who have put forward a 19-point plan that we can do within 60 days to hold Wall Street accountable and end the corruption there. And I was the first candidate in the United States to sign on to that platform. And then finally, our foreign policy really needs to have significant changes. We need to move away from being a dominator in the world. You know, we have 1,000 bases and outposts around the country, around the world, and many of them are in countries that don't even want them, that are fighting to prevent them from being there. We need to become a partner in the world. And part of the way that we do that, in my mind, is by leading by example, by truly respecting human rights. We respect human rights when it's politically, in our favor, but we don't respect human rights when it's not, right? So we need to respect human rights and respect international law. We need to disarm our nuclear weapons. And we need to honor the sovereignty, the right to self-determination for other countries, because in all of the countries that we're intervening in, there are nonviolent movements going on of people who are fighting for the type of governance that they would like to have. But when we intervene with violence, we disrupt that, we make that not possible. So we need to define security in a very different way. We need to define security globally as people having a home, access to education, healthcare, a job with a living wage, healthy food, clean air and water. We need to define security as every person being able to walk in their community without fearing violence or harassment based on the color of their skin or the clothing that they wear or the religion that they pursue. So these are some of the reasons some of the things that I'm working on. I do have a website, flowersforsenate.org, where you can learn more. I've written pretty extensively about a number of issues over the years. We also have a weekly radio station in Washington, D.C., where we bring the voices of people around the world and around the country who are fighting for justice and human rights to give them a voice. So thank you very much.
Given your background in healthcare, aside from moving to single payer, which will take at least a few years, if not longer, what could the current laws be amended, adjusted, etc.? What should our community be asking for from their congressmen, senators, etc., to do to the current law to make their healthcare a little bit better, cheaper, more affordable?
The problem is, and this is kind of the myth that we have in this country, that we can't do a single-payer system. It would take so long for us to do that. The reality is that The thing that's standing in the way between being able to provide high quality comprehensive care to everybody is the fact that we have a market-based or insurance-based health system. And so it's very administratively complex. Unlike other countries, we spend over a third of our healthcare dollars just on dealing with the hundreds of different plans and what do they cover and where can you go and how much do you pay and how much does someone else pay. We have 2 single-payer systems here in the United States already, our traditional Medicare and our VA system. We could rapidly transition to an improved Medicare for All system. That gives us the savings to eliminate copays and deductibles and provide more comprehensive benefits. And it really, the fact is that the private insurance companies are not providing a service for us. They're a profit center for those companies. And so it's done around the world in most other industrialized nations in some form. And that's really the first step, is taking healthcare away from considering it a commodity and considering it a public good. And then from there, we can expand our primary care workforce. We can do the things that we need to do in terms of allocating our resources in a way to make sure everybody has access. But the reality is we cannot tinker with the current system and think that we're going to make it better, because we need to remove that profit drive from it.
Okay, fair enough. It seems that a lot of the current domestic terrorism issues are based on psychological issues for those people performing those kinds of terrorist acts. What can you think of that can be done with respect to psychological care, etc.? Is there enough coverage in the Affordable Care Act or other places for psychological issues, or is there a lot of work to be done on the psychological side?
Well, so yeah, I mean, obviously we don't have good mental health services here in the United States. We haven't for a very long time. We use our jails for patients who have mental health problems instead of providing them with treatment and that they need. So, but I think we also need to be based in reality, that, you know, terrorism is not actually our greatest threat. It's one that's very effective in making people afraid and making us support these wars and these weapon sales. So let's be, you know, realistic about the killers that we have out there, you know, which is, in addition to the rare terrorist attacks, I mean, it's the environmental toxicities that we're experiencing, or the economic violence that we see from the big banks who prey on homeowners, who prey on our cities, and, you know, really steal the money from them that's needed for jobs and infrastructure and things like that. So we definitely need to improve our mental health services. That's another place where a single-payer healthcare system would be helpful, because it is comprehensive. But in addition to that, we need to bring out, you know, more social workers, more mental health professionals, and get them out into the communities. There's a lot of healing that we need to do, quite frankly, in this country.
So one of the biggest services that the MCC specifically provides is around health insurance, health care for its community. That's so great. We've served thousands, tens of thousands of patients here for many years. What are your thoughts about community-based clinics like this versus, I mean, again, until you move to fully public capabilities, what are the strengths and weaknesses of community-based public clinics like what MCC has, and do you recommend expansion? Do you recommend partnerships with others? What's your general thought on that? Well,
I commend you for doing that for your community, and I think that a big piece of providing healthcare is the cultural component, that people need to feel comfortable in the healthcare setting that they're in. They need to feel that they trust it, that they're understood. And so I think that community health centers can really provide that. And of course they need to be expanded. I think that we need more health facilities that see their mission as serving the community, rather than the health centers that we have that see their mission as how can we profit off of the illness in our community. So I do commend you for the work that you've done.
So one of the things you probably see pretty regularly is that you're almost like screaming into a hurricane, right? Because a lot of the things that you say, obviously many people would actually believe in. Why are we struggling to get what you think is the right thing to do, whether it's on climate change, whether you think it's on healthcare, etc. What could this community do to help promote the kinds of things that you're trying to say, which we all probably at some level believe in? And I'll ask you some questions about, you know, the poverty side. Nobody's going to argue that poverty is good. There are arguments about how we should approach it. So why is it so tough to make the cases that you're making, and what could the community do to help move that?
Well, I mean, some of the lessons that I learned when I was in Congress in 2009, 2010, advocating for a healthcare system that was based on the evidence of what worked, that was based on sound health policy. And it was the money, the wealthy elites, the fact that the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the big for-profit hospitals didn't want that to be on the table, and unfortunately our politicians listened to them, and they excluded the voices. We tried to have a national health finance physician testify in the Senate Finance Committee. Her name is Dr. Marcia Angel. She's a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, very respected, and we pushed and pushed for her to be able to be at the table, and they would only allow the CEOs of the insurance companies and the Business Roundtable. And so we went there, 8 of us, 3 doctors, we all have, well, one was a psychiatrist, 2 of us were pediatricians, some lawyers and some health advocates. We stood up in that committee and called out and said, why are you not allowing health policy experts to testify? We were each arrested for that. But I was then the first person invited by Senator Kennedy, who was alive at the time, to testify before the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. And as I told you, we kept pushing and we got the single-payer bill to the floor of the Senate. It's recognizing our power. And that's what I've been working on, is how do we use our people power in a strategic way to put our agenda on the table and make it win. In 2014, the FCC was threatening what's called net neutrality. And net neutrality basically means that all of us should have be able to go where we want to on the internet without discrimination based on your ability to pay. You shouldn't have to pay more to access a full internet. And they were going to put in place rules that allowed the telecom companies to turn internet kind of into cable TV. And we worked with a number of internet groups, and many of them said, well, we can't possibly get what we really want, which is to reclassify the internet as a common carrier. You know, the telecommunications lobby is too big. And we said, no, that's what we have to have. That's the only thing that gives us the legal power to defend the internet. And so we harnessed the popular power, and we went down there, and we protested, and we got it on the table within 8 days. We actually occupied the FCC, which they'd never experienced before. So they put our solution on the table, and then we were able to drive 4 million comments into the FCC, vast majority of them in favor of that. And we continued to push all the way through, and then in February of 2015 we won. And the internet was reclassified as a common carrier, and that was a big lesson for a lot of the internet groups who were used to compromising, who were used to saying we can't possibly have what we want. But we're in a situation where we have to have what we want, because we're not taking the appropriate steps. We're not going as far as we need to go to address the crises that we face.
So interesting that a lot of the positions that you're taking have a government component. So whether it's single payer, whether it's poverty with the basic income. Given a number of, especially immigrants as they come from other places, they are deathly afraid of the government for a variety of good reasons. Yeah. So tell us why we should say that what has been working here in the United States, which has been free market, general, little r republicanism, little d democratic approaches with private sector, why should that be something that we should fight and go towards more government solutions? Why the government angle?
That's interesting. So I wonder how many people actually think that the market-based solutions are working for us when it comes to things like public goods. And we see privatization of water companies who then don't test the water or don't report the accurate tests of the water because they aren't beholden to the community who can charge high rates, for water. The fact is that as we've moved since the 1970s, 1980s into commodifying more of our areas that are considered public goods, we're seeing greater inequality, tremendously greater inequality, growing poverty, stagnation of wages. The wealth in this community continues to grow, the production continues to grow, but wages are stagnant and wealth is declining. So I would not say that, when it comes to things like public goods, like healthcare or access to education or housing or water or food, that those are areas that we really want the market to be involved in. There are some areas where the market does work, but when it can exploit people, then it doesn't, or the environment.
So I think you made a great example of the Flint sample. So if you look at what happened in Flint, and EPA rules, local government, all the way from the lowest level government all the way through to the governor, who just got called into Congress and had a little fun times, right? So tell us what in this case, was it truly the fact that it was private sector, and then if it was government only, everything would be okay, or what? It's got to be a little more complicated.
We have to be realistic about the political situation right now. I mean, the corporations and the wealthy are controlling our government, right? I mean, Gina McCarthy, a number of years ago, she's the head of the EPA. The EPA scientists actually, using the data, saw that we needed to tighten up our smog regulations because of a certain number of people that die every year because of poor air quality. And so they came to her and they said, we need tighter regulations. And then the White House, when she brought it to the White House, they told her to stand down, right? And that was because of the corporate influence over even at the decisions that are made. So I think that's why we need people who are not part of that system. That's why I'm running. I don't take corporate money. Nobody in the Green Party does. We don't take PAC money. We are here to serve the people. We have 4 pillars of our party. It's nonviolence, sustainability, social justice, and democracy. And we need people inside of the Congress who are not afraid to tell the truth, who are not afraid to call out those administrators when they don't do their job. I mean, as a physician, just one example. There's a community in southern Maryland called Cove Point. There's a company called Dominion. They're building the first fracked gas refinery and export terminal on the East Coast, and the first one ever to be put in a densely populated community. They lied about the population. When they sent their permit to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they left out 90% of the population. The people in that community have gone to government at every single level, local, state, senators. I've gone with them, and they have told them, this facility is not only going to put 22 tons of benzene, formaldehyde, and other disease-causing chemicals into our community every year, but it has the risk of fire and explosion from which we cannot escape if that happens, literally. There are 2,400 homes in a 2-mile radius of this facility, and no government official has answered them. Barbara Mikulski has completely failed them. Her office has done nothing. I'm not going to be that kind of senator. I have stood with that community. I've taken action with them. I've organized with them. I've gone to meetings with them, with elected officials, to try to push for a risk analysis. Because if we had a risk analysis, it would overwhelmingly show that this facility should not be built here. So that's the reason why we need people like me in the Congress at all levels of government. And we actually have people in the Green Party in Maryland running at a number of different levels. Because we can be there. We're not going to ignore those voices when you come to us and say that you're being mistreated. As a mother and a physician, I can't do that. I can't look someone in the face and turn you away when you're telling me that you're facing violence or health problems in your community.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if you think about taking that position here in the States, tell us from your, just on a foreign policy side, do you believe that the 2-state solution in Palestine and Israel is still possible, or is time run out? What are your general thoughts on that, given your position on fairness, equality, etc.?
Right, so in general, when it comes to foreign policy, as I said, I believe in honoring other nations' right to sovereignty and self-determination. I do not think that the United States or any foreign country should be dictating what type of government a country has. But what we should be doing is certainly not making things worse by increasing the violence in those countries, which undercut the nonviolent movements that are there. I don't think that we should be providing arms or money to groups or countries who use them against other peoples in an unbalanced and unfair way. When it comes to Palestine, I think we should recognize it as a country. It's embarrassing that we don't. I think that it's a very difficult situation because Israel has taken away so much of the land the Palestinians had that I don't know how economically they'd be able to survive as a nation under the current situation. But I think that what we should be doing is stop sending military aid to Israel, more than $3 billion a year. This is outrageous. I'm very much against what's happening with the anti-BDS movement, and it was our Senator Cardin who slipped that provision into the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Fast Track Agreement. as an amendment. I think that BDS, I was in college in the early 1980s, and it was a time of the apartheid in South Africa, and I was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement then. And I think that boycott, divestment, and sanctions are a way it's a very powerful, nonviolent way to bring about political change, and I don't think that we should be doing anything to interfere with that. And I think that we need to, if we can, well, first we really have to end the isolation of Gaza. I mean, the rates of poverty that are there are so high, of malnutrition, starvation, not to mention the violence that's put upon them. We need to get supplies to the people in Gaza so that they can survive and repair the damage that has been done to their communities. And then we need to do what we can to facilitate peace without injecting our will over that. We need to facilitate their ability to determine what is going to be the best way to honor both the Israelis and the Palestinians and to be able to live truly in peace. And I work with groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and the Palestine Solidarity Movement up in Baltimore.
So make a suggestion there. So there obviously, it's not so much a Jewish-Muslim issue. These are lands that have been around and in dispute for many, many years. Talk to us what you're doing with these Jewish communities. Are there folks that will say that they're looking at this as a land grab, land-based issue, or is it more of what you're seeing is truly religious? It is Muslims versus Jews.
You know, what I really think it is the word that many people use is really genocide against the Palestinian people by the Israelis. Jewish Voice for Peace, it's great to see many Jewish groups that are able, and even, friends of mine. So my kids are young adults, and we talk about this, and many of them are Jewish faith. And they talk about the divide between themselves, their kind of generation, and the older, Jewish generation. And they're able to separate their faith from the country of Israel. And they are proud of their faith, but they are not proud of what Israel is doing. So I don't know if you could say that it's a purely religious. I think it's really the. I think it's apartheid. It's genocide of the Palestinian people. It's Israel trying to take over, and
So now, just what are your general thoughts on the current choice of candidates with respect to the two political parties? Who are you supporting besides the Green candidates in your party? Tell us a little bit about what your view is on what people should be seeking as far as their candidates are concerned at the presidential level. At the presidential level.
Yeah. Well, we do actually have a Green Party candidate at the presidential level. Her name is Dr. Jill Stein. She ran in 2012. She's an internal medicine doctor who left practice also to work primarily on environment and food and health issues, and has run for office since 2002. And I think that we have to break out. We have to have third parties that challenge the two entrenched parties that we have right now. Because even when those third parties don't win, they still change the political environment, they change the political agenda. Right now, the Democrats in Maryland, they don't feel like they have to work too hard for your vote, right? They know that they can scare you with the scary Republicans who are scary, but they don't have to work very hard. When you have third parties who challenge them on the issues and talk about solutions they won't talk about, suddenly they have to work a little harder. And I saw this out in Seattle with a woman named Kashama Sawant, who ran for city council out there and won. And I've been out there a number of times, and it has changed the entire political culture of that city. When we go to the city council meetings, and I've been to a number of them, number one, they're packed. Number two, we see incredible amounts of people lining up to testify with very intelligent analysis and testimony. And then we see the corporate kind of Boeing and Microsoft get up there with their very weak analysis, and we're finding that city council voting unanimously for things that they had never voted for before, like living wages, like affordable housing. And so this is the power that one person can have to move that agenda in the direction that it needs to go into. So I would say, I wouldn't support, I haven't supported either of the two corporate parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, for a long time. We really have to build a political alternative in this country that reflects our values. And I encourage you to check out the Green Party website, because you'll see, in addition to the 4 pillars of nonviolence, social justice, sustainability, and democracy, we also have 10 key values. We have to build that up.
Okay, very good. All right.
If I could also just add, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is something that we have had a campaign and been fighting for the past 5 years, and fought against Fast Track as well, and we are continuing. That's a critical fight that is continuing. We're fortunately winning that right now, but our organization is Popular Resistance. I hope that you'll check it out and learn more about what we're doing. Thank you.
School dropout rate among the Hispanic students is 45%, and there is not enough psychologists or counselors. The Spanish-speaking psychologists or counselors are not there, and the nation is going to be about 30 or 40% population will be Hispanic by 2050 or something like that. Unless we do something now, what will be the nature of the country by that time?
Right.
Is the public, the opinion makers know about this fact?
Right, well, it's certainly not being discussed, is it? So, you know, the mental health services for the Hispanic population has a growing dropout rate from school. So, one of the things about moving to a single-payer healthcare system is that we're seeing more and more of our health professionals, and I see this from my friends, maybe you do as well, who are leaving practice and moving into medical directorships and things like that. Same thing with nurses doing utilization review and moving into these administrative positions. Under a single-payer healthcare system, those direct providers would probably be drawn back into the system because they can actually practice again in an environment that honors their knowledge. So, but I think again, it's a matter of priorities. You know, where's our budget being spent? It's not being spent on the social workers and the mental health professionals and the services that we need to have in schools to meet the needs of these students. And then on the front end is what are they experiencing at home? And, you know, are their parents experiencing stress of living in this country, maybe not having documents? Are they experiencing economic stress from not being able to earn a living wage? You know, if we move towards a guaranteed basic income, it would, and it's been shown in Manitoba when they had a guaranteed basic income in the 1970s, they saw dramatic improvements in health and social functioning. And so, again, it's priorities. We need to prioritize taking care of people here and also taking responsibility for the damage that we've done in other places around the world.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to talk to people afterwards, too.
And so we just heard from Congresswoman Donna Edwards that she'll be here in a few minutes as well. So if you guys can just stay, we'll take Dr. Flowers' questions, and as soon as she arrives, then we'll do it. Yeah, by all means.
Okay, thank you. I share many of the goals.
Because we feel, again, such a need to build a political alternative that challenges the two entrenched corporate parties. And so he decided not to do that. He wanted to have the ability to raise a lot of money and to get media attention, which is difficult for third parties. And so he has, in a lot of ways, reached young people and inspired them. My own oldest son is volunteering for Bernie's campaign, very excited about it. He has changed the political dialogue, the public dialogue, for a lot of people who haven't heard about some of the solutions that he's talked about. But I do think that really he's reflecting kind of the movement, what we're hearing from the movement, since the Occupy movement, which I was also involved in. You know, the bringing up the topics of the corruption of money and the wealth inequality. He's really reflecting kind of that level of political dialogue. But we know that the Democratic and the Republican parties are pretty much, you know, they have a lot of control over who wins in their primaries. And we haven't seen an insurgent Democrat win since McGovern did, and they changed the rules immediately after that to make sure it wouldn't happen again. We already see that, you know, moves starting to happen with President Obama telling the funders that, you know, Bernie's campaign is winding down now and let's all shift our support to Hillary. And we see Bernie Sanders backing off his anti-Hillary rhetoric as he gets ready to endorse her, as he's supposed to do as the Democratic candidate. We see we'll see what happens. We see that, the leadership on the right at the last American Enterprise Institute conference in North Carolina corralling their forces about how they're going to make sure that Trump doesn't get the nomination. And they have the ability to do that because their convention rules expire right before the Republican convention, so they can write new rules. So this is the way that our political systems are corrupted and fixed, and it's really impossible to challenge them from the inside. We've seen labor try to do that for a long time. We have to challenge them from the outside.
Question?
Dr. Flower, I have no problem. Your party.
Here this afternoon. It's been a long time since I've been here. Of course, when I used to represent Montgomery County, I was here at MCC all the time. And in fact, I think the last time I was in this center, I was having my blood drawn back there for a blood drive. But it's really great to be back here with you and to be back with the community. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Donna Edwards. I represent the 4th Congressional District. It used to be Montgomery and Prince George's County, and now it is Prince George's and Anne Arundel County. I represent in the House of Representatives. I am running for the United States Senate to replace Senator Mikulski. Now, nobody ever really replaces Senator Mikulski. We build on her great leadership all around our state and our country. But I do believe that it's time for us to have a voice in the United States Senate that really represents the interests and the struggles of middle-class families and those who are working to grow their way into the middle class. I know here at MCC you've done a great job in serving the community in the community clinic and in education and bringing together some of our new immigrant families. That's the work of this community center because it's part of the community. And I think in the United States Senate it's important to have a voice that really represents those interests so that we can make sure that we pull our communities together. We've had an opportunity in the past to work on things that I care about, like how we deliver quality, affordable health care. How do we make certain that we have schools that work for all of our children, no matter what their zip code is, no matter what their family circumstances are. How do we make certain that our families, especially our children who are going to school, receive breakfast, lunch, and dinner, good nutritious meals, so that they can realize their fullest potential. When I first came to the Congress, when I represented Montgomery County, my very first act as a member of Congress was a legislation that I had passed to add Maryland to the after-school suppers program. And I don't know if it's because some other politicians didn't really see these families the way that I did, but I know that my own experience of raising my son helped me understand what it meant to put a meal on the table. And so when we did that, we were able to serve then tens of thousands of students all around our state, here in Montgomery County and across our state. And that's made a difference in terms of achievement. It's made a difference in terms of lowering dropout rates. In my time in the House of Representatives, I've really been focused on how do we make sure that we change the prospects around education for every single one of our children. I have had the pleasure of hosting college fairs during the time I've been in the House, where 8,000 students have come through those college fairs, been connected to colleges and universities, and now have the ability to think about themselves differently because they're like I am, first generation in their family to go to college. And I feel deeply proud of that. As the chair of the Democratic women in the House, I've been able to focus on things like how do we raise wages of women in the workplace and the prospects of women in the workplace and in our society. And I remember I was here actually for an event celebrating the women who were part of the congregation here and the MCC, because we value our leadership of women in business, in homes and families, and in our communities. And so I am grateful to be able to run for the United States Senate to take the case all across our state about the value in each one of our communities. I was here at MCC when we had important discussions about the role of law enforcement in this community and making certain that we could draw fine lines, really really fine lines around what the appropriate role is for law enforcement in terms of our national security and domestic security interests, but really working together with the community so that we could all play the role as Americans of making certain that our communities are safe. And I think that those are discussions that should continue, and where there needs to be an advocate in the United States Senate, particularly for the Muslim community, for African American communities that are disenfranchised, for our Latino families who are suffering some of the same challenges around immigration. And I will be that kind of advocate in the United States Senate. So I'm grateful to be here, and I look forward to taking your questions today. And I can't tell you how excited I was to drive through the parking lot and to be back here at MCC once again. Thank you very much.
So thank you for that. You may have known that Congressman Van Hollen was here just a little while ago. So we'll ask you similar kinds of questions. But one of the first questions that an audience member has asked is that they feel like you've been getting a little bit of either negative or unfair press in the Washington Post recently. Do you want to comment on that as to what you think might be either unfair or the coverage that you've seen? Any just general comments would be good.
Yeah, the only thing that I can say is those of you who know me know that I travel by my own guide, that I make my own decisions. The decisions that I make are not about a political party. They're not about whether the Democratic Party establishment tells me to do one thing or another. In part, it is the reason that I have such a close connection and affinity to this community. And I would just say, you know, with respect to the Washington Post, I don't think that the things that they've written, frankly, have been fair. Those of you who've known me as a member of Congress know how committed I have been to serving each and every one of our needs. And when you call my office, when people were under threat of losing their homes to foreclosure, when people needed health care, you all reached out to my office and we were able to respond to that. And so the interests that concern me the most are the interests of voters and our families. And I'll respond to those every single day. And what's written in a newspaper is neither here nor there. It's important, the votes that are going to be cast on April 26th. And let me just close by saying this. It is true that I have not traveled within the Democratic Party establishment. And I think that in our politics today, we need just a little bit of that. And I'm a good, solid Democrat, no question about it. But when things are not right, I'm the one to stand up to challenge those. And I think that what you want in a United States Senator is somebody who looks at the situation at hand and then represents the interests of all of our voters, and I mean every single community. I've done that before, and I will do that as your next United States Senator.
So the word establishment has been used a few times, both on the Democratic side as well as the Republican. What exactly does that mean to you, and what does not being catering to establishment actually mean as far as day-to-day governing might come as U.S. Senator?
Well, I'll just give you one example. Many of you know it because we all suffered through it. Here in Maryland, our party establishment really, when they went to redraw the district lines, I think that they did that in a very, took a very partisan approach to that, and I spoke out and I said that I thought that we needed to step back from the politics and do what was right by communities and make sure that we drew district lines that really reflected the populations that we serve, the continuity of the districts, and I don't think that that was done, and so I spoke out against that. Now there are other times, of course, when we were working to pass the Affordable Care Act, and I started out as a person who really wanted single payer for health care. And when I realized that we were going in another direction, as much as I still want single payer, I said, you know what, let me try to work within what we were trying to accomplish as Democrats so that we could get a bill to the president to sign into law. And what I did was, rather than fight our party establishment, because I held true to wanting one kind of health care, I said, let me see how I can make it better. And so I wrote a provision in the Affordable Care Act that holds insurance companies accountable for unjustified rate increases. And as a result, insurance commissioners all across the country and here in Maryland have the ability to clamp down on the rates at which they increase insurance rates. And here in Maryland, our insurance commissioner used the provision that I wrote just a few months ago, and is saving Maryland consumers $66.6 million in 2016. I think that that's the way you make progress work for Maryland's working families, and so to try to make changes and improvements. And there are other times, sometimes on foreign policy and sometimes on domestic policy, when it's important to stand for principle, because it's our principles and our values that really guide us.
That's interesting, because last year, as Benjamin Netanyahu came and spoke to Congress, I think you took a principled stand, which I'd like for you to comment on, is that, so Chris Van Hollen did attend the speech that Netanyahu gave at Congress. I think you did not stay for that. Could you talk a little bit about why you chose one versus the other, and how you feel about that going forward?
Sure, let me back up, because when Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the Congress a couple of years prior, I actually did attend. And the reason is because when the Prime Minister set forward to come to Congress then, there was an invitation that was extended and a communication that took place between the White House and the State Department and the respective Democratic and Republican leadership to issue the invitation for him to come. That was done in the right way, and so I attended. This last time, however, was not the case. And as a result, I made a decision that it was important to honor and value the President of the United States and to respect the President of the United States, and I decided not to attend. That doesn't mean I didn't watch the speech. And each of us could have watched the speech without giving value to the presence of the Prime Minister when he came to the House of Representatives in the joint session without either the reaching out to the President of the United States, our leader and Commander-in-Chief, or reaching out to the State Department, our guide on foreign policy, or reaching out to the Democratic Party leadership. I thought that that was done in the right way, and I was not going to give value to his attendance to a joint session, given that he had disrespected our system, our process, and the President of the United States.
So in that particular case, what do you think as far as the merits of his arguments with respect to the nuclear agreement itself, and where do you generally stand on the agreement itself?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that, because for about a year and a half before the actual agreement was reached, I was participating in small group sessions with policy advisors at the White House over the time period of the negotiation, hearing from the White House advisors about what the process is, about where some of the stumbling blocks were. And so over that year and a half, I came to be very knowledgeable about the context, the texture, and the substance of the ultimate agreement. When the agreement was finally announced, I, very early on, one of the earliest members of Congress came out in support of the agreement. I sat down and I did my due diligence, having participated over the last year and a half. I sat down with the documents in a secure room and read through all of the documents. I participated in the security briefings that were done prior to by the administration and our briefers, and I came to the conclusion that this was an agreement that was unprecedented, in fact, and that would result in us moving toward a denuclearized Iran. And it isn't that I agree that Iran is not a bad actor in so many other ways and areas in the world, but it would, in my view, it was better if they are going to be a bad actor in some places for us to have a nuclear agreement in place that denuclearized Iran. I also think that having gone through that agreement with our P5+1 allies, that there's a measure of accountability in there that's an international measure of accountability. And I think one of the things that we saw shortly after the agreement was entered into, remember when our seamen ran aground in the Gulf, and they were held for a very short period of time in Iran. What I thought is that the way that then our diplomats could engage directly with Iran that resulted in their release very, very shortly afterwards, that is a testament to why it is that we need to come to these kind of agreements, so that when we have difficult circumstances, that countries, rather than engaging in confrontation, engage in dialogue and diplomacy. And I think that that was an early example of a way in which the future can look when we begin to have true diplomatic engagement. And I'm not saying that it's easy now, it definitely is not. But we're on a different footing, and I think that that contributes both to the security, and my principal interest is the national security of the United States of America. And I think that that contributes to our national security interest, the security interest of Israel, which feels threatened by Iran, and contributes to the broader security interest of the region.
And so, talking a little bit, staying on the foreign policy side, with respect to the kinds of genocide that's occurring that Secretary Kerry announced as far as ISIL, we are looking at smaller areas, countries of the world like Burma that are having similar problems. What could a U.S. Senator do in those scenarios? Do you have enough power or enough leverage to call out those kinds of genocide and then do something about it, or can you just bring attention to it but not really do more than that?
Well, I do think that the principal conductor, if you will, of our foreign policy has to be within the executive branch. I don't think that we can have 100 senators being their individual voices of foreign policy or directing it, which is why I've been very supportive of the administration, and frankly reluctant sometimes when, in Congress a lot of letters float around about issues dealing with every single nation, and I've been actually quite reluctant at times signing on to a lot of these things, because I don't want to do anything as one member of Congress or as a senator that actually impedes on the President of the United States being able to conduct one foreign policy. I do think that with respect to some nations where there are human rights violations being perpetrated in a number of different ways, that it is important to use the levers of the United States Senate as a bully pulpit, respecting human rights. I think it is imperative that the United States participate fully within the context of the United Nations and other multilateral institutions, so that we're not just bringing to bear our voice when it comes to these issues, but we're bringing to bear the entire international community. That's when I think it's actually much more effective use of our foreign policy and our diplomacy.
Great. So coming back here to a couple of domestic issues, fracking is increasing as far as just quantity is concerned, even here in Maryland, and both Chris and Dr. Flowers a minute ago commented on that. What is your general view on fracking, fossil fuels, and where do you stand with respect to whether it's dangerous or beneficial?
Well, I think I want to put this in the context of a long-term energy policy for the United States. It's actually connected to where we want our energy direction to go. I think that it's imperative for us across the board to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. That I believe that our future is in renewable energy and our future is in reducing fossil fuels so that we deal in the long term around issues of climate change. Now let's separate fracking, because I think one of the challenges with fracking as it's been done in multiple places across the country is not knowing what's being injected into the ground, and there not being transparency about that so that communities and states can make a decision about whether that makes sense for us or not. I've generally not been a fan or a supporter of fracking. I think if you look at Oklahoma, just a few weeks ago, I don't know if you read this, but in Oklahoma came down and said, whoa, we need to place some additional regulations and because we are seeing an exponential increase in earthquakes that's attributable, we believe, to fracking. That was Oklahoma's conclusion. They went from something like having, I don't know, 10 earthquakes a year to several hundred earthquakes a year, and they attribute that to fracking. And so I think there's a lot that we don't know about what is a relatively new process, what's being injected into the earth, and then what the long-term consequences are of doing that. And I have always been in favor of figuring out ways to invest in new technologies that are going to allow us the relative responsibility that we have to do two things: to become more energy efficient, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and to lower CO2 emissions. And for me, that's the standard by which we judge whether we engage in a particular energy direction or not.
Okay, great. So another question that came up earlier today was around drone strikes. That's been increasing quite a bit, but potentially even more so in the Middle East and other areas, although given the classified nature of the drone strike, we don't always know, except when there's collateral damage. What's your general view on drone strikes in general? This idea that we can outsource our wars to machines is one way of looking at it. Benefit, not benefit, for, against, any comments on that?
Well, I mean, let me just say as a delimiter on our foreign engagement, that I have tended to believe that it is better for us to make investments in what could be described as smart power rather than militarization. And what do I mean by that? In the case of drone strikes, we can't overstate the impact of collateral damage. We've seen that over the past 16 years as drone strikes have increased, and certainly over these last several years. I think one of the challenges that we have is that as Americans, we are not that interested in getting engaged on the ground in military action where the lives and treasure of American citizens are put at risk. And so there has been this tendency by both our presidents and our military leaders to engage in drone strikes as a counterbalance to military engagement on the ground. I still think that the same question has to be asked about why and whether and under what circumstance, whether you're using drones to do your work or you're using humans to do your work. And so my question is always about whether it makes sense for the United States to continue to be engaged in what are in effect civil and sectarian wars. I'm not certain that that is the role of the United States. And I think that we have to start asking that question, and then so until we answer that question, we don't get to the question of the means and the mechanism by which that takes place. And I have an idea that if we asked ourselves about being engaged in more sectarian and civil wars, that we would actually reduce the need to get engaged by whatever means. Now, that is not to say that there are certain circumstances where you have, for example, an identifiable training camp that is a different question than a facility or location or an individual in the middle of a town. And so I think that's a different question in terms of whether you would use a drone or not. I do believe that the future for us should be thinking about less military engagement rather than more. I would rather have us, for example, if you look at the northern Africa, I would much rather have us engaged in investing in human resources, health, education, welfare, creating economies, driving economies, because I think that those things there actually, build more friends and allies and strengthen countries so that you don't leave a place that essentially has no rule of law, where non-state actors can do their dirty work.
Yeah, great points. So, a couple of questions came up earlier today around education. What's after No Child Left Behind? What are your thoughts on that on the younger side? And then the issue of secondary education, college education becoming almost unattainable for many because of its cost, or at least saddled with plenty of loans after they get out. So talk a little about what comes after NCLB, and is there anything that Congress can do about the cost of higher education?
Well, we know that what comes after No Child Left Behind is that it's left behind. And we have a new education authorization, I think, that takes us away from this never-ending testing that doesn't prove anything, so that we give educators more flexibility in their classroom to teach the students that they've been dealt in the public classroom, and to give them the kind of resources that they need. And so I'm glad that we have left No Child Left Behind, and we are in the very, very early days. I mean, we just passed that a couple of months ago, the very early days now of implementing a new approach to pre-K, K-12 education that is not as reliant on a testing regime to prove our children's value and worth. And I will just share a story with you. I mean, in the time that I've been in the House, I think there's almost not been a week that has gone by in 7 years that I have not spent some time in some classroom. Kindergarten to 6th grade, middle school, high school. I visit classrooms, and not always in the classroom, but maybe it's a student program at a class, or some program, because it gives me the ability to see what educators are experiencing in the classroom, some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And I will tell you that we have an uneven divide in our education system. It's no surprise to anyone. There are some zip codes where children are getting, a great education. There are a lot of resources, public and private resources, available to those children. They have 21st century laboratories and other tools in them. And then there are other classrooms here and around our state where that is not true. And by and large, a lot of those classrooms that are not 21st century classrooms, that are not, don't have the same resources, public and private resources available to them, where many of our children are falling behind, and many of those children are our minority children falling behind. And so I think that we have to really dig beyond the 30,000-foot level on the ground to look at what's happening with education. And what do I mean by that? Very often we see both scores and performance reported in macro terms. So Maryland has the #1 school system in the nation. Well, for some children, but not for all children. And we need to know beyond that line where and which children are not receiving that #1 education in the country. And until we do that, we're not going to be serving the needs of all of our children, and we will continue to see the gaps that we do, because if you don't know what the problem is, you can hardly meet the need. I've visited classrooms I visited classrooms in Baltimore, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, where I see students coming to school with a whole bunch of different needs that aren't just about what takes place in that classroom in terms of education. They come from families that are stressed financially. They come from families that are stressed by immigration concerns. They come from families that are stressed by a whole bunch of different factors that impact the ability of that child to learn in the classroom. And I think in some areas, we need to go back to a place where the school becomes sort of a hub for the neighborhood and for services, because if you're really investing in neighborhood schools and you have wraparound services that are available in those schools, in some of the most vulnerable places and the most challenged places, those children will have a better ability to learn. And the parents who might be working 2 jobs and who can't get to a PTA meeting all across town or a county where their child goes to station. One of the reasons that I worked to pass the after-school suppers program when I first came in is because I was going around to schools and I was seeing kids who might be eligible for free and reduced breakfast and lunch. And I would just say as a mom, well, what happens to them at dinner? And the educators in the classroom would say to me, we know they're hungry because when they come in the morning, the first thing they do is rush over to get breakfast. And if they're doing that and they're not able to focus on the learning component because they're hungry, then we're doing something wrong. And so that's why I worked to pass the after-school suppers program. I also very much believe that when we talk about STEM education, we know that the jobs that are created for the 21st century, many of those jobs are going to require science and technology and math skills in order to participate in the economy. But most kids make a decision in about 4th grade that they are